Hi, and thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitnie Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays talking all things leadership, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Happy New Year!
Happy New Year.
Happy
Yes.
New Year. How are you?
I'm good. I am good. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Happy New Year to you. Thank you for joining us. We are going to launch this year. This is our first episode of the year. So we're going to launch this episode and this year talking about the pillar of the simple, one of the pillars of the simple leadership method. We're going to talk about self awareness, and we're going to introduce, or if you've been watching, reintroduce ourselves to you so that you know a little bit about who we are as you continue with us on the leadership journey, your leadership journey, and our leadership journeys. We're continuing to grow in our leadership as well. And so, what we like to do here is share the things that we know, the things that we're learning, and some of the things that we don't know. And if you know them, we invite you to share with us as well, right? So this is a two-way street or a three-way street. That's Robert, you, and I. And so let's help each other to learn and grow on this journey. So, Robert, opening thoughts.
Self-awareness is so important, and it can be a little scary when you start looking at yourself and you're like, oh, wow, I don't do that well. Or I have one particular thing that I do over and over and over again. So looking at yourself and taking that fresh perspective can be a little daunting at times.
Absolutely. I was thinking about sort of my self awareness. I'll call it a journey. And, when we first started talking about this a couple of years ago, I was doing some research, and the research says that most people think that they're self-aware. And in fact, most of us are not particularly self-aware. And I was thinking back on sort of when I feel like I really developed some self-awareness, and as it relates to leadership in particular, but just in general, I feel like it has come out of, and it builds on itself over time in relationships, right? In various relationships, because one, our relationships are a mirror for us, and the things that we tend to notice, and I'll dare say, don't like in other people, are often a reflection of things within ourselves that we don't like and haven't really addressed, right? And I think about some leaders, some people that I have worked for and with, and thinking, they're not particularly self-aware about how they interact with people, how they show up. And it got me thinking, well, am I self-aware? Right. So it's what started me thinking that it was important. Because no one said there wasn't a moment in time where someone ever came to me and said, you're not a good leader because you're not self-aware. I just noticed that was something that I saw lacking in other people. And that made me take a step back and say, well, are you particularly self-aware? And there were areas in my life, I'll own it, where I was not. I wasn't paying attention often to how I showed up. I'll put it that way. And I remember in law school, I always sat at the front of the class. And I don't know if I've shared this story before, but uh, in my whole life, I would sit in the front of the class. And that means that you don't tend to see the people who are sitting behind you, right?
Mhm.
And the first time I was forced to sit in somewhere other than in the front row was in um, anatomy and physiology. This was back in high school. And so we sat alpha order. And so
Mm.
in the back of the room, and I couldn't see. It was the first thing. So I couldn't see. So I don't know if I sat up front so that I could see, and there was and what do you call it? A coping mechanism that I hadn't really recognized. But I'm sitting in the back of the class and I couldn't see. And it's when I started wearing glasses, right? And I was like a junior or senior in high school. And so all of a sudden I couldn't see the board and my grades started to be affected. And so I ended up getting glasses. That started I think, a path for me of paying attention to sort of how I was showing up, but it was surface. And then, later in life, I'm observing people that I was like, I don't understand how these people got these positions. How did they get here? They don't understand how they're impacting other people or what they say or any of those things. And I had to stop and think, is that how you show up? Is that how you show up? And in some respects it was. And so when I was in law school, I was having a conversation with some people in my study group, and they made the comment of how I pretty much ignore the people who sit behind me. And I was like, I, well, it was like, well, that's not intentional, but they're behind me. Right. But it was sort of a metaphor. They were behind me, and therefore I did not see them. If I
Mm.
didn't see them, right. And so it sent me down a path of paying attention to, or paying more attention, because I think I still have some of that. If I don't see it, it's not happening. And I have to work harder to make sure that I'm beyond my peripheral vision. And for leaders, that's really important, right? You can't just operate based on what you see. And because our vision is narrow. Some people don't even have peripheral vision that goes very far, let alone taking the time to see what's behind them and around them. So for me, it was eye opening and really starting to pay attention to what that means in my interaction with other people and how I show up and how I'm treating people and being intentional about it.
Wow, that's a really good point. See, so many things popped into my head, and I know I say that a lot when you start talking. But one of the things that I immediately thought when you said that other people told you was the Joe Harry window, where one of the parts of the exercise, you have other people really explain to you how you appear to them, because we have that blind spot, and a lot of us, and I'm certainly in this category, don't realize how we come off to other people unless someone tells us. I think for me, the epiphany that I had, why I became really, my self-awareness really grew when I went to coaching school. And so I really started like thinking about how I interacted with other people and thinking about my own biases and things like that.
Yeah.
That was really huge for me. And just the filters that I just employed as I just went through life. And one of the things that I realized about myself was that I rely a lot on my strengths. So, and I've seen this running track, playing basketball, as a musician, I really leaning into the things I do well and avoiding things that I don't. And so when that finally clicked, it became one of these things where like, okay, if I don't know these things, right? Learn them, study them, really build out that so you have many strengths, or you can really bolster your weaknesses. And something that you pointed out to me early on when I was just starting my journey as an entrepreneur, you're like, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to have it all worked out. You like, I get it, but because it's how you are, but you can start. And so that was another window, or that was you cleaning the glass for me, so I can see out of that pane of window. And other people have pointed out things like I'm a very, people can probably figure this out by how I present myself. I'm a very regimented person. I've never been to the military, but I do come from a military family. So there's always structure. I like structure. And when there isn't structure, I make structure. And so one of the things that I've challenged myself to do is exist in areas where there is no structure, where I can just kind of be at ease and kind of figure it out. And I noticed, we're talking about self-awareness, that when I'm in those situations, I will try to make structure. Right? So that's, it's one of those things where you sometimes need, or I should say almost all the time, you need somebody to point out those blind spots that you don't have, so that you have a more well-rounded or a better view of yourself. It's the same thing as when you hear yourself for the first time in a recording, you're like, who is that? You're like, no, that's you. That's your voice. That's how you sound to everybody else. Although you think you sound very resonant, you don't really sound that way to other people. Your head has a lots of different nooks and crannies in it that creates this resonance chamber. You don't sound like that when it comes out of your mouth. So
absolutely true. So just at the let's say the bottom line basics of self-awareness, right, are the thoughts that you have about yourself, right? They're the thoughts that you have about yourself, your knowledge of yourself, how you perceive yourself, your knowledge of how you perceive others in the world around you, and it has a lot to do with how you impact others. And so having self-awareness becomes really important as a leader, because you are ultimately responsible for other people, right? As it relates to a team in the context that we're talking about it here, you are responsible for other people, their growth, their performance, and making sure that they have what they need in order to do what they are called to do, to play their part in the shared goals and visions that you have in your organization. And while we believe that leadership is not limited to title, right? It's not limited to the position that you have in the organization. That's the context that we're talking about it. And so how you perceive yourself has an impact on how you act. It has an impact on how you treat other people, how you treat yourself, whether you're respecting people or not. And so if you lack self-awareness, then you may end up doing things that you don't mean to do, right? And so the 6 components of simple, and I'll just lay them out quickly or mention them quickly, are self-awareness, intentionality, mastery, purposefulness, leverage, and energy. And the combination of those, when you are paying attention to how you are showing up, whether or not you are acting with intentionality and within the purpose that you have as a leader, that you are have mastered yourself, the knowledge that you need, the information you need about your team, leveraging that knowledge, leveraging your team members, and then bringing energy. All of that helps you to be a more effective leader, right? Someone who can get your team to maximize the strengths, right? Minimize the weaknesses in order to accomplish the goals that you have. And so in this context, self-awareness becomes hugely important because it informs the other aspects of Simple, and it is a huge part of emotional intelligence. And so what we wanted to do today was to talk about that, but share it in the context of our own experiences and how we have developed self-awareness and steps that you can take to help you develop, improve, recognize whether or not one you are or are not, or to what degree you are or are not, and how you can improve that. Because the more self-aware you are, the more you can act with intentionality, right? The more you can see what you need and where you can go in mastery of yourself, mastery of relationships in terms of emotional intelligence, right? Managing your relationship with yourself, managing your emotions. If you're not aware of how you show up and that you're a hothead or that you're passive aggressive or any number of other, or that you are, absolutely wonderful. And maybe that's how you show up. You know, knowing that helps you know what you need to do moving forward. You can't make changes, you can't improve, you can't learn and grow on things that you don't know need attention, right? So it's intention and attention combined that help you to take the actions that you need that get you where you want to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it doesn't happen in a vacuum. You're going to see when you become self-aware, or hopefully when you become self-aware on one thing, whatever process you used to gain that self-awareness or to hone it or to focus it, you could use it in other aspects of your life. And that's why I brought up the different, things that I'm interested in life. And when I became, the instances when I became self-aware in those particular things, because it was a process of going, hey, what am I like? How am I in this particular situation? Oh, what are the similarities there? This is something that I do in nearly everything in my life. And then you can start to look at what you can do in those situations to become more self-aware, or to, if you find out that you're like me, you rely a lot on your strengths. What can you do? What can you put in place to help you, strengthen the areas that you're not, that you're weak in? But you may find as a leader that you don't know how you show up in conversations with your subordinates. That's a huge thing. I've worked with many leaders that had zero clue how they showed up or how they appeared. And they would, well, I thought I was being very empathetic. And then would have a conversation with their subordinate, their direct report, and they would say, well, every time I mentioned something that you didn't like, you frowned or you squinted up your forehead. And the intention may not have been to disagree,
Right.
but it was how it was received by the other person. I had someone point out to me that, you walk around, this is a long time ago, when I first started my career, one of the managers pulled me over and said, you're always angry. And I'm like, what are you talking about? every time we see you, you have a scowl on. I don't know. That's my thinking face. And so I had to, I walk around like, puzzling out something, but to other people, it looked like I was upset. The other aspect of that, and I'm going to throw this out there, and this is probably the first time we ever did this. As an African American man, I had to realize how it appeared to people outside of my culture. People would be nervous, and I was like, "That's not what I'm trying to do." Of course, that's their issue,
Right.
but you have to be cognizant of how those things come across to other people. And so that was one of the things that I had to. It was made aware to me very early on by a little older manager, and I was like, "No, I'm just thinking about stuff. I'm not mad at anything." But throwing in some race and culture in there, that's the stereotype. And I said, "No, I'm not angry in this particular case." There have been times when I was angry. So learning that helped me control how the exterior was appearing to other people.
That's such a good point, right? So there is the in brand, right? That there is the image that we want to portray or to be, and then there is the perception that other people have. And you make a really good point. Self-awareness is, this is who I am. This is who I want to be. This is who I want to project myself to how I want to project myself to others. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the message that people walk away with, right? And so there is the reality of what you do, how you do it, what you say, how you say it, and then what other people get from it. And your point is well taken that sometimes, because every single one of us, and if we say we don't, I'm going to say you need some self-awareness around this, right? Particularly if you haven't done any work in this area. If you've done some work in this area, I will say that it's still there. And maybe it doesn't show itself as much as it used to, but it probably still does. That we all have our lenses, our biases. What is the two types of biases? Implicit and explicit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sort of we have the biases that we have that we are aware of, and those that we aren't aware of. And self-awareness will help you developing self-awareness around your biases. Instead of saying, I don't have any biases, acknowledge I do have biases, because I have a lens, a perspective about, in a way I see the world that may or may not be reflective of what's happening in the world. And I've had similar incidences with that, where I would be walking down the street, I'm minding my own business, thinking or not, and someone would say, why are you so unhappy? What's wrong with you? And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with me, right? But the look on my face to someone who thinks that you should go through life in a particular way, right? Smiling all the time, or whatever it is that they think that should be, right? We all have this is how life should be. Things, if you ever find yourself saying, this should be XYZ, that's a bias. Right? That's a bias.
I was going to point out that person that said why are you so unhappy? They have a bias, just like the person said, we're like, well, why does that, why does it mean, how come that means I'm angry? It could mean other things, right? It could mean other things.
It could mean other things, and often it does. And it is interesting because I just finished reading the Four Agreements,
Mhm.
and again, and now I'm reading the companion to the Four Agreements, which goes into it a little more deeply, and it talks about exercises and things that you can do to help you through the Four Agreements. And one of the Four Agreements is to not make assumptions.
Mhm.
Right? And we make assumptions, and those assumptions are based in our biases, again, about how we think things should be. And when things aren't the way we think they should be, right, we project that onto other people. And sometimes we're not right. Right. And then we act as if our assumptions are truth. And
Right.
that's what creates problems between us, right? So I have my assumptions, you have your assumptions, we come together and we are operating in our own assumptions, projecting them on the other person. You're not cooperating with my assumptions. And I'm not cooperating with yours. So now we've got a conflict, right?
Absolutely.
And a confrontation, because we think it should be some way other than what it is. And so having self-awareness around the fact that that's how you operate allows you to take some steps back and ask some questions. Is what I'm thinking true? Right? And so what we tend to do is we put stories around facts, right? So the fact is that the sun is out and the sky is blue, right? That's the fact. How I interpret that is a whole other thing, right? And I happen to love that. Maybe you don't like, hot, oh, it's like that, so it's going to be hot.
Right.
Maybe it's going to be hot, maybe it's not. Maybe it's downright chilly, right? But we make these assumptions about things. We see something, we tell these stories, or what you think a sunny blue sky day, what that means, because it's tied to something that happened in your past.
Correct. Yeah.
And so we have to take the time to just ask questions, right? And so some of the things that you can do that will help you is self-reflection. We talked about this. And then Robert mentioned feedback earlier, getting feedback. Sometimes it's unsolicited. Sometimes you're asking for it, right? But getting that feedback from people that can help you unpack what your biases are, what your assumptions are about life and other people, and whether or not, and then test it to see whether or not what you're thinking is true.
Yeah. I think that's really, really important. I can't stress enough to try to get other folks' perspective. It's got to be somebody you trust, right? Because some people won't give you accurate information. They may have other agendas, but it should be somebody you trust. That was very interesting to me back in the day. And at the time, ironically, when that person made the comment, it did make me angry. I was like, what? No, I'm just...
It's funny how someone questioning whether or not you're angry or unhappy makes you angry or unhappy.
And that was really the thing that really got me. I was like, well, it was my reaction. I was like, well, I could see why they would say that. I wasn't, but because I tend to get angry quickly. And so, I was young. I was, young and you chip on my shoulder, whatever you want to call it. And so that became let me unpack that and find out why that is the case and what I can do about it. Because if I want to be successful in business, I need to cultivate a more positive a more positive reputation. Like people will be like, well, we'd like to have him on this project, but we may disagree with something that he puts out there, and he may get angry or so I
Mm-hmm.
had to really think about how I wanted to respond to that. And that what ended up happening was learning how to take feedback from
Mm.
others, because I wasn't particularly good at that. And I realized that. And I remember, I ended up getting into treatment. I was young. I was really my second gig out of college, and it wasn't my preferred profession. I was a musician. I was doing this thing as it wasn't a side hustle, but it was my day job. I was doing both of them, and I got some not very good feedback from my boss, and I remember getting really, really angry. But when I calmed down and thought about it, I said, you know what? I don't agree with these other things he said, but this thing he said, that hit home because it was true. And once I could admit that it was true, it led me down the path of, okay, here's some things that I need to do. It opened my eyes, right? I became more aware. I need to do to be successful in this particular situation. And I ended up doing really well. Full disclosure, I did not get along with that boss at all. But I ended up taking what they said. This is the interesting part about that. Ended up taking what they said to heart. And when that person left the job, they took me with them. And so that all started with some self-awareness on my part. The interesting thing about that, we're talking about self-awareness. I reached out to that person years later, probably, I don't know, 2 years ago on LinkedIn, and thanked them. They didn't remember it. They remember taking me with them because we worked together after that, but they didn't remember the initial conversation
Mm.
that turned my performance around. It was really interesting, and like, huh. They weren't aware of it, so it was just like blurted some things out, and it just, so the second part of this is really trying to be aware of how those things, or at least seeing how those things land on other people when you communicate to them, right? It was really interesting.
You make a good point about it. In the end, it being about what you wanted, right? And if you're not getting the results that you want, it becomes imperative to look at how you're showing up, how you're impacting other people. And sometimes what I hear is, I don't need to change for anyone. You don't need to change for anyone, but do you need to change for you?
Well, you know what? It's so interesting you say that, because there's a lot of people out there that sometimes forget that we are not islands, right?
Right.
You can't, you may have, and this same boss pulled me into the office once, and this may have been the same conversation. He goes, "We know you're smarter than us. We don't need you reminding us." And I was, it's like, oh my goodness. But it was because I had a chip. Like, we know, you do your job. You don't have to tell us how badly we're doing our job. We know you see those things. Do what we're asking you to do. And that became and it was funny because it on one hand it appealed to my ego how this person told me. I was like, well, but then the slap came after. It's like, do you want to continue working here, right? And I was like, well, I need this job, even though it wasn't, like I said, my preferred profession at the time. It was something I needed,
Yeah.
and so it just opened up it was a painful thing, but it opened up a lot of self-awareness, and that's what led me down the path to where I am right now. Was that initial very, very unpleasant conversation It was really interesting. He built me up. Yeah, well, we know how smart you are, and then slap. And that was like, oh, okay.
Right. And so what I hear you saying is that ultimately you thought about what it was you wanted, right? And how you wanted to navigate not only that relationship, that job, but sort of the bigger picture. And because it doesn't do you any good. You're absolutely right. We don't live on an island. We don't operate in a vacuum. And so acting as if you do, that you can just sort of, you know, run roughshod over people because you have a title or position or that's your personality,
Oh, you're smart.
or that you're smart,
You have a
right?
degree. Or
It, it's, if you're smart, you don't have to prove that you're smart,
exactly.
right? If you're in charge, you don't have to prove that you're in charge. And so the question is, are you getting the results that you want? Right? Ask the question, am I getting the results that I want? Or am I simply proving how, showing how smart I am? And I had a similar conversation with someone who was like, you are often the smartest person in the room. And it was really interesting is I haven't necessarily felt like that, or maybe I didn't own that I felt like that. Maybe I did, but it was like you often are the smartest person in the room. You do the same thing. You don't have to prove it, right? You don't have to beat people down with that, or your
Your acumen.
physical prowess, or or whatever it was intellectually. And there have been enough things in my life where I have not been the best, that reminds me that there's always going to be somebody else, even if I think that I am, right? There are other people in the room, in the building, in the city, the county, the state, the world, that are more of whatever I am. And so you don't have to work so hard to prove to other people what you are. You can just be and let it stand on itself. And I think that's one of those areas where leaders in particular are wanting to establish that they're in charge, and so that their interaction with people is to continuously remind them, to establish, I'm in charge. And they're not paying attention to how they are impacting other people. Leaders, you should be lifting your people up. You should not be like grinding them down. And I don't have the exact numbers, but there was a study a few years ago um, about leaders and giving positive feedback and reinforcement over negative. And there's this feeling that we have to give in order to motivate people to do better. We have to sort of hit them over the head with the negative, remind them of how they're not good enough, and that we have all the power. And it's just not true. Right. And so having some self-awareness around what you're doing and how you're doing it is going to make a difference.
Absolutely. It's just very interesting to me. It really comes down to, as a leader, what do you want? What's going to be more beneficial to you, to your organization, to your department, however you want to call it, your unit, your business unit, division, whatever you want to, whatever you're in charge of. If you're more concerned about your ego, and I say that because that's what's really behind that. I'm in charge. if you're more concerned about that than the performance of your team, then there's an issue. And some people, they kind of hold this duality or this pecking order. It's like, respect me as the leader, your boss first, and then the performance of the team comes second. Those people should try working in Scandinavian countries, because it's not the same over there. Your boss is considered a member of the team. Yeah, they have a title, but you can get your boss just as in trouble as they can get you in trouble. So I think that a lot of times this is a thing that we do here in this country, and sure, we talk about culture a lot on the show. It's something that we do here. However, there are more effective ways to navigate as a leader, and that's what this is really all about. And do it in a way that's going to, how should I say this? It's going to be less of a cost to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to give you more benefit. It's going to be less stressful for you. So I forget who said this to me. Words are free, right? Words are free. Just if you give somebody, if you give them some constructive feedback, however, but you also tell them what they're doing really well, or tell them what they're doing well more than you give them negative feedback, they're probably going to perform better. So try it out and see. But there's a lot of folks that they subscribe to that negative feedback. I had a boss that told me, when I first got hired at this particular company, that I will tell you when you do something well. Those things seem very rare. But I did get a lot of negative feedback. But occasionally he would tell me that I did something well, and it was usually because I did something that they had never done in the organization, and he wanted to find out how I did it so he can show it to his wife, who had the same job that I had but at a different company. So, how did you do that? It was really, it took me a while. I was like, oh, why is he? Oh, he's sharing this stuff. It was very interesting. But it's really about getting your team to perform optimally. That's what it's really about. And you will get the accolades that you deserve when you put your effort into building up your team. I think sometimes people forget that, because we do come from, that rugged individualism type of society. But, the team will carry you along. I have yet to hear of any, I watch, and you do too, we watch a lot of basketball. When I talk about college teams, you do hear about the individual players that are great, but more times you hear about the coach. The coach who put the team together, the coach who brought out the strength, the coach who, looked at the configuration of the team and put the team in a position where they could win. And that's, I think, a good metaphor for what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And then that's a good point. So the next thing I would bring up about tapping into figuring out where you are in your self-awareness is continuous learning, right? And an opportunity for that would be to work with a coach. So you've gotten some feedback from team members or your superiors, right? You've taken some time to do some self-reflection. Work with someone, right? Take some classes or work with a coach, someone that can help you, or mentor, right? Someone that can help you continue to learn and grow and tap into things that you can do to improve that. The other thing that would be helpful would be meditation or journaling, right? Some mindfulness practices that give you an opportunity to ask some questions and then sit with the answers that others have given you in feedback or things that you've learned along the way. I learned that I was a perfectionist while I was taking piano lessons. I probably have been a perfectionist for, I'm sure if I've ever been a perfectionist, it was long before I started taking the piano lessons. But I was taking piano lessons. Initially, I was teaching myself. I'd always wanted to play the piano. When I was a kid, I played the flute. I played the violin for a very short period of time, didn't go well. Played the flute for a much longer period of time. I quit playing the flute and with no analysis around this for a very long time. But I quit playing the flute when I stopped being first chair and ended up back in the I don't know, 100th chair or wherever I was in this, in the orchestra that was so big, right? So in elementary school and junior high school, it was what do you say, a big fish in a little pond, and then you go to the big pond, right? I'm in high school and all the best, musicians from all the places, because I grew up in a place where there was only one high school. It was in Berkeley. It's not a small place, but there was only one high school, huge high school. So all the kids from everywhere, right, are playing. And I ended up, I don't know, the 40th chair or wherever I ended up. And
moving up, you said 100th before. Now
I don't know how many, I don't remember how many, but it was there were a lot of flute players, a lot of flautists in this orchestra, and I was near the end. That much I do know. However many, I was like one or two from the end. And not shortly after that, I quit playing. Right? Didn't connect the dots. I chalked it up to the other things going on, and I'm too busy and blah blah blah. But I continued to play, just not in the orchestra. I took private lessons and continued to play. And then eventually I stopped playing altogether, but I'd always wanted to play the piano. And so when I was an adult, I bought a piano and I started to teach myself. I knew how to read music. And so I was like, well, I'll teach myself. I got to a point where I probably had learned what I could learn. And so I started taking piano lessons. And I had this experience where I would get stage fright playing in front of the instructor, no less, right? And so I would practice at home, and I would play, and it sounded great, and I would go, for the lesson. And this one particular day, he got a phone call in the middle of the lesson and left. And I had been trying to play this piece, and he kept asking me, did you practice? Did you practice? I was like, yes, I practiced. I played it perfectly at home. And he was kind of like, mm-hmm. He left the room, and all of a sudden I could play it again. And when he came back in, I had my fingers just would not play this piece in front of him. And it was then that I was like, you've got stage fright or some performance anxiety or something's going on. And it was then I was like, you know what, you're a little bit of a perfectionist. And so it was sort of a running joke until I'm studying organizational behavior in leadership at a USF, and we're having this peer exercise, and one of the members of my team says that I was a perfectionist. Right? We'd done some assessment, and she said, you're a perfectionist, and it really solidified right then, right? And so now I have this awareness around being a perfectionist and not doing things that I don't think that I can do, right? And so I have to work to overcome that. And I have to be very intentional about when I want to do something and it's not getting done, to stop and think, is this a perfectionist tendency that's popping up, right? And we all have that about different things. And so taking the time to really ask those questions and being mindful about it. And I've journaled about it and I've meditated about it and looking at the pattern. And you had talked about this earlier. You didn't use the word pattern, but these patterns that keep popping up over and over again. And so there was this pattern of how when perfectionism pops up, how I don't follow through. And so working with that. And so if you notice that you've got some patterns in your life, taking the time to meditate about it or journal about it or talk with a coach or a therapist or whatever is going to be really helpful for you in those situations. One of the things that I see happening with my clients is around delegation and how they delegate, right? And they are not delegating because there is this thought, I don't need to do that because I could do it better myself. Well, maybe you can one time, but if it's something that should be delegated because your time is better spent doing something else and you're not delegating, or you're delegating poorly, right? Spending some time thinking about that is going to be really helpful for you in the long run.
Absolutely. And one of the things I love to point out there, I know we're not talking about that in particular, but it's a really good segue here. A lot of times managers or leaders don't know the contradictions that they bring to those conversations. I had a conversation with the client about that. I was coaching them about delegating, but on the back of that was I don't have any time to do other things. And then, they didn't want to delegate. And I was like, okay, so let's connect the dots here. They didn't realize one of the reasons why they didn't have any time was they didn't trust the team enough to let them, to delegate work to them. So I just wanted to point that. That's another awareness piece there. Being self-aware is
absolutely. Yeah, such a good point. When you've got these conflicting beliefs about things, right? And how that clash between the two holds you back. Getting some awareness around that's going to be really helpful for you. So, some closing thoughts on this.
Learn some tools, right? So there's some tools that will help you become more self-aware. I mentioned the Johari window. You can Google that. It's Johari. It's not Johari. It's Johari, named after Joseph and Harry, the two people that created it. It's a great tool for becoming more self-aware, to look at your blind spots. So I think that's a great place to start.
I love that. All right. Self-reflection. Be open to feedback, right? Feedback from your team, from your peers, from your superiors, from people that know you, know your work, know the way you're showing up. Mm-hmm. They should be people that you trust, but sometimes you're just going to have to take feedback from people who have observed you, right? Absolutely. And don't take it personally. Accept it for what it is. Take from it, right? Work through what you hear back, and if you're hearing something over and over again, it's probably true. Mm-hmm. Right? If you hear a one-off, right? But if you get consistent feedback, it's probably true. Mm-hmm. And so you don't get to write that off. Take the time to meditate, to journal, to be introspective, right? And that means giving yourself time and permission to have that time. And then going back to the point of what is it that you want? What are the outcomes that you want? What are the results that you want? And are you getting what you want? And is there another way? This isn't about telling you that there's something wrong with you and that you need to make a change. But if you're not getting the results that you want, there may be some shifts that need to happen. And so that's what you're looking at. All right.
Absolutely.
Cool. So I'm self-aware, Robert's self-aware.
Mostly.
Now you're self-aware. and there's still room for more. There's
Absolutely.
still room for more. So Robert, if someone wanted to work on their self-awareness and reach out to you so that you could help them in that area, how would they do that?
They can reach out to me at inspireme@roberthilliardcoaching.com. That email comes directly to me, or they can just go to my website, which is Robert Hilliard Coaching, fill out the form that's on that website, and tell me what's troubling you, where you'd like some more self-awareness, and we can certainly work on that.
Absolutely. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me at shiftingintoaction.now.site. Shiftingintoaction.now.site. There is an opportunity there for you to complete a form and schedule some time with me. Would be happy to talk with you about self-awareness or anything else. So if there's a topic that you would like for us to cover, please reach out and let us know. In this new year, we are still putting together the topics for the year. So there's plenty of opportunity for you to get your topic on the agenda moving forward. So with that, we want to thank you for joining us again, Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, here on the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. We look forward to talking with you and seeing you, growing with you, being more self-aware, and all the rest in this brand new year. So get some self-awareness and
Absolutely. Bye now.